Well, hey there, you're on the internet, I have some free time, and welcome to the Triple N Network, where all you newbie nib nerds can find all the news you'll need. Let's look at an ink today, shall we? Now, today's ink I have in sample form. However, I can't seem to do the proper color correction that I need to for this ink on my camera, so I will have to do that in post. Note here on how that went. And since I have a feeling I'll probably have to upload scans in between each set of paper, I'll try and remember to leave enough time to do that, so yeah. Anyways, today's ink is by Herbin, and it's Réséda. And so Herbin, and that's just how I'm going to pronounce it, because as someone told me yesterday, I'm terrible at languages. So yeah, I've been given fountain pens for a long time, since I was little. They were supposed to help correct my horrible handwriting, but they did not. But yeah, so people would give me tins of Herbin ink, like this one. And, you know, they would be in, I don't know if you've ever seen the Herbin rack of cartridges. You should look it up online, it's really funny. It's sort of like this big thing, and then each row is a different color, and so you just sort of see the top. And sometimes people would just, you know, like, oh, this is a blue one, you know, blue that, or that, and so they'd give me these inks, and so this is probably one of the oldest inks that I'm familiar with, this brand. And I really didn't like them for the most part, and yeah, I'm recently getting back into them because I need more inks to review, and this was one of the inks that I used to be given, you know, in the little tins, and it's one of the inks that didn't leave a great impression. So I'm just mentioning this because my cat's angry. No, that's not why I'm mentioning it. I'm mentioning it because I do have a bit of a, I don't know, I guess you could call it a prejudice against this brand because I have not had very good experiences with it in the past, and this is one of those inks. Just wanted to acknowledge that going in. But yeah, the camera isn't displaying it very well, but this is sort of a seafoamy color. I say in a couple of the reviews that it looks just like Scope mouthwash. Not the straight blue Scope, not the straight green Scope, but sort of the middle range Scope mouthwash. But yeah, it it's perfectly that color. But yeah, so two pens I used were these. This is a Pilot Metropolitan with a Japanese fine nib, which is just so darn fine. I'm still learning how to write with it, and I've had it for a couple months now. And yeah, it's like writing with the corner of a razor blade. I don't always have the best luck. This is a JinHao X450, and I tend to love my X450s because all of them have been pretty broad and pretty wet, and this one is. So I thought that would be a nice contrast. A very, very fine nib and a fairly broad and wet nib. Okay, so I wanted to try and find some comparables. I don't know how well they'll show up on camera either, but I'll see what I can do. So here's Diamine Soft Mint. Here's Vert Réséda. Sorry, Vert Réséda. And as you can see, they're very similar. This one is maybe just a bit more saturated, a little bit darker because it's more saturated. Here's Pelikan's Edelstein Jade. Again, extremely similar. This one much more saturated, much darker because of it. Here's Toucan Aqua. Parts of it are very similar. Now, I don't know if this will show up, but do you see how there are some very distinct lines, like, you know, like right here, that separates like this and that? This is pretty straight blue turquoise, and this is much more green, these bits. And I feel like if you were to get a happy medium between these two, you get something very, very like this. And here's Private Reserve's DC Super Show Green, which I'd say is, again, fairly similar, but a bit darker, and this kind of like aqua has a few areas of very distinct separation of more of aqua with more yellow and aqua with more blue, like down here. So, yeah, I may have to scan those in as well. Now, let's look at the chromatography. Actually, yeah, maybe I'll just do the chromatography on the paper because I want it to have a white background. I'm going to try and zoom in, bear with me. Yeah, now the one on the left is the one that I let dry, and the one on the right is the one that I did as it's supposed to be done. As you can see, it's pretty transparent. Like if I were to pick this up and hold it, you can sort of see my fingers through the paper. And so since this ink on here isn't very dark, it tells you just how undersaturated this is. But as you can see, they're both largely the same. Maybe the initial drop on the dry one is just a tiny bit darker, but that's really it. There are these huge bare patches all through here. There's very little separation of color, like, oh, this bit's more this and this bit's more that. No, it's pretty solid, one color. Yeah, not a ton of water resistance implied there. Now, here's the resistance tests. Now, as you can probably see, water really got it moving. It is pretty gone, but there is a little bit. 1/3 bleach solution absolutely obliterated it, made it look like it was never there. And I think the only reason that didn't fully disappear was because I could feel that I was starting to break through the paper because of the acidity or baseness of the bleach, and I just didn't want to just eat right through the paper. Ammonia pen flush really got it going, but the pen flush really did start to eat through the paper. You might be able to see that line right there. Hydrogen peroxide really got rid of it. But again, I always recommend first clean with water. If you exhaust the water, add a little pen flush. I never recommend cleaning out your pen with hydrogen peroxide. Now, onto the paper test. Top down in density, Clairefontaine 90 grams per square meter. Now, I really hope I'm able to get this color problem fixed in post, but yeah, this is a very interesting color. It's aqua. This is an aqua color. Yeah, and as you might be able to tell, if you've seen some of my previous videos, I prefer quadrilateral paper, also known as graph paper, because I need more of a guide when I'm writing, otherwise I'll start writing like this. And I don't like it when I can so clearly see the lines from the quad paper through the ink, even through the darkest parts of these scrubbies. That's not great. This ink is undersaturated. I would like this ink to be, if this is 100% of its normal saturation, I would like minimum 150. So yeah, I need this half and again. So yeah, it's... Anyways, that Japanese fine took 10 seconds to dry. The fairly broad and wet JinHao took 18, but if you look at that smear, you can see just how light it is. And the thing is, it gets very nearly that light in some areas of the writing, like the top of the S in Wizards, part of the Q in Quickly, top of the L in Quickly. And an ink that is already this light, this thin, yeah, like, this is hard for me to read. This right here, the bit with the Japanese fine, is just a little bit hard to read. Because it's too light, it's too undersaturated, it doesn't create enough contrast against the background paper. It's just not doing it for me. It is a little wet. It's a 6 out of 10 wetness. There's no bleed, no feather, no echo, no sheen. There's very little left after the water test. The camera's actually darkening it up a bit. You can see these dots fairly, I mean, like, there's something there. They look like the lightest bits of the shading. And all of the dots. You can see the ones from the Japanese fine as well. But the writing is largely gone. There are just little bits of it left. Next up is Fabriano Echo Claw. It is an 85 gram per square meter paper. It's great. It's quickly becoming one of my favorite papers to write on. Probably is my favorite paper to write on at the moment. But yeah, that Japanese fine took 12 seconds. That broad and wet JinHao took 20. Here you can see a bit more of a halo effect, which is the dark outline around the wettest parts of the writing. Like you can see it up here. I hope that comes through. But you can also see just how light it gets. Like look at the top of the very beginning of the Z in Wizards, or the bottom of the A, top of the W. Oh, in the Japanese Fine, the top of the X in Boxing. Yeah, it's, when it's light, it is very light and it is very uncomfortable to read. But yeah, yeah, there's no bleed, no feather, no spread, no echo. I don't know if I'd say that, yeah, there's no sheen. I don't know why I forgot to write about sheen, but there's no sheen. Yeah, you can still see the dots from the dot pad through there. That's not good for me. That doesn't work for me. Yeah, again, the water test, here even the dots are fairly gone, but what little does remain, it's just the haziest little bit. Yeah, all of it is from that X450, which puts down more ink put down, more remains. Next up is Rhodia, 80 grams per square meter. Yeah, here, this is unusable to me. Maybe not so bad with that really broad, really wet X450, but this Japanese Fine is just done. That's not working for me. I can see this purple, the purple from the graph lines, more than I can see the writing in that Japanese Fine. And in areas, even in that X450, it's just too light. My cat is really angry. But again, you can see that dark halo outline effect around the wettest parts, like you see in the X450, like in Wizards and Jump. Anyways, that Japanese Fine took 10 seconds to dry. The X450 took 19. Yeah, no bleed, no feather, no spread, no echo, no sheen. Yeah. Water test, really, really gone. And again, the only hints of anything we see, like the bottom of the A in water, or the dots, or the end of these downstrokes, those are all from the X450. Next up is Tomoe River, which is known for drawing out shading and sheen and echo and dry times, and there is no sheen. There's absolutely no sheen, not even a little, not even a hint. There's none. And even though this paper doesn't have dots or lines or any of that stuff, it is still too light. Oh, my cat is really angry. But yeah, that Japanese Fine, so this paper did draw out dry times. Japanese Fine took 16 seconds. Broad and Wet JinHao took 28. We do get a very distinct dark outline around the wettest parts of the writing. And the truth is we need that. This would be absolutely just unusable to me if that dark outline around the wettest parts didn't create enough of a contrast between the regular writing and the background. It would be deeply uncomfortable to read. But yeah, undersaturated inks do tend to have very wide breadths of shading. Which some people really like. So if you want a really wide breadth of shading, but you don't mind it sometimes being so thin that it's hard to read, this is one of those inks that you might want to look into. Here I say there's no echo even. The thing is, sometimes that's hard to tell when you're still writing the ink test, still writing the test, and it's still wet and you have trouble turning it over. Because the truth is, even though really undersaturated inks tend to not have much of an echo because they're just not dark enough. In some areas with the X450, it does get dark enough to give you an echo, and I don't know if it's going to show up when I put it against the background. Yeah, it isn't really, but right through all here, here and here, and the scrubby. So pretty much this is all, you can kind of notice it out the back. But, so yeah, that's, but yeah, this paper loves to let ink slide away when you add more water, and it really, really did. There's nothing left of the writing, of the bits that said water test somewhere in there. You get the barest little hints of the dots from the X450, and that's about it. Now for the next 3 tests, I only used that Japanese Fine, except to write the name. And yeah, so here's 20-pound copier paper. We get spread. So the line width, so that's the Japanese Fine here on the Tomoe River where there's no spread, and here's where it is on the really world's worst copy paper. So it gets broader. There is a very woolly texture. There is no more shading. Here it took 1.5 seconds to dry. There's feathering. It's not great, but yeah, there's very near bleed in spots. I don't know if this is going to come through because the ink is so light, but there are a lot of little dots that very nearly make it to the other side, which, granted, it is a mildly wet ink, but this is still a Japanese fine. So yeah, and now more absorbent inks like papers like this one tend to draw the ink in, make it harder to wash out. This one, I don't really know if I can say that because yeah, it's so light to begin with that just washing it out a little bit is gonna doom it pretty much. And yeah, it just sort of dyed the page, and so it made all of it just this barely light seafoam green. That's not great. Now, next up is Mead Notebook Paper, which is very common for school children in the United States. And yeah, this type of Mead, which is the type you might find in like a spiral notebook, yeah, it's been feathering a lot lately, and here it kind of has, not as much as I was expecting, but it kind of has. There's not a lot of shading. You do see about as much as you'll find in the writing here in the scrubby. It took 2.5 seconds to dry. We don't get as much spread, so the line width didn't increase as much, but there is a little. And there's no bleed, there's no echo, except for maybe here in the scrubby, but that's like, as you'll see, that's like towards the end where I think I started to almost scratch through the page. Now here, we do see a little bit remaining in the water test. Not much, but a little. And usually this paper tends to freak out when you add water, like the ink on it tends to freak out. But it could have been a lot worse. It's just, it's so light again, like even lighter, so that it's harder to read. But if you're determined, now, last up is Moleskine paper, which I hate because it is very poorly made, and yet they make you pay a lot for it. And yeah, it took 7 seconds to dry, which yeah, is nearly as long as it took on the premium papers. It's extremely woolly looking, like you can see the pulp that they mashed into paper. You get feathers. It's very unattractive, and there are dots of bleed, like actual bleed, like it came out the other side. And again, this is a Japanese fine. This is taking it as easy as you can, pretty much. Yeah, and this paper really freaked out. Like, it feathered, it exploded, and it got lighter, so recovering that is nigh impossible. So yeah. Anyways, there you go. For your consideration, Herbin's Réséda. Yeah, I really hope I'm able to do the proper color correction and convey this color, because I actually really enjoyed this color. I would really enjoy this ink if it were more saturated. I wish there were a way I could do that. Like maybe I'll, I don't know, buy a bottle of it and just leave the cap slightly unscrewed. No, that sounds dangerous. I don't recommend that. Don't do that. But yeah, it's a really interesting color. It's fairly unique, and yet it isn't, because if you look at these, it is so like all of these inks. You know, the DC, the Toucan, the Pelican, the Diamine. It is so very like it. It's just, it's undersaturated, which is a problem for me. In many cases, it's too light for me to comfortably read. But yeah. So, yeah, there you go for your consideration from the Triple N Network. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe to the channel. And thanks for watching. Bye.